Spring football is back, and Eli Drinkwitz confirms that baseball was a major reason why Sam Horn is not participating in football this spring or this fall either. So let's talk about that and more notes on Mizzou football coming up right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And indeed, as you can tell by my attire, spring is here. I enjoyed the weather this morning. And Eli Drinkwitz, well, he enjoys poking the bear. He did it to Oklahoma fans. And you know what? I've got a whole theory that's a little bit half-baked, but I think you'll be convinced it's pretty doggone good, that offense matters more in football, but defense matters more in basketball. So I want to get to all that coming up here on the show. But first, I want to remind you that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers, join today and you'll get $150 in bonus bets. If your first bet of $5 or more wins, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And let's start today's show while talking about, well, Eli Drinkwitz opening up spring practice with his remarks yesterday with about a 10-minute opening statement, took some questions as well. And, of course, he was asked about Sam Horn and if he has a chance to maybe play in 2024. Well, Drinkwitz said, I don't know, and it depends how far we go. But yeah, I don't anticipate that he would play next year. I think that's pretty obvious at this point. I think the 12 to 15 usual month timeline, I think that puts him at least out in February, more like May realistically. So even if the Tigers make it all the way into the college football playoff final, I just don't see there's any possibility of that. But Drinkwitz did elaborate here, continuing saying, we elected to take the full surgery, and there was an opportunity there that you could have potentially not done a full reconstruction and been back for football, but leave something to be desired on the baseball end, which from Sam Horn's perspective makes all the sense in the world and is kind of where I figured this whole thing was going. After the second recurrence of, it seemed like a similar elbow injury that flared up in the previous baseball season, it just seemed like this was the logical thing to do. He's obviously, at this point in time anyway, a much, much stronger prospect on the baseball diamond than he is as a quarterback. So to get this fixed actually doesn't really hurt his baseball status all that much. And again, his status as a football prospect is very much in question at this point. The talent is there, and all of this shows why some other programs, some other major programs, perhaps even his home state, Georgia Bulldogs, were hesitant to let him be a two-sport guy, to let him play baseball, to let him play football, because obviously a different type of throwing motion. Pitchers, young pitchers in particular, can definitely develop elbow injuries, and that's a real risk. It's a real risk to your football future, and we've seen it here. We've seen the ramifications of this. But having said all that, I still think Missouri did the right thing here at the beginning, telling Sam Horn, yes, you can play baseball here. I think it was worth a shot. Listen, every four-star quarterback prospect, we've seen this before at Missouri, they're not all sure things by any stretch of the imagination. So, again, that was part of the risk with Sam Horn. I think that's a risk you take with that type of talent every single time. And quite honestly, I think there is a little bit of a side benefit here for Drinkwitz in the Missouri program, maybe showing other recruits that, hey, if you're a two-sport guy, we'll stand behind you. And by the way, even more importantly, we're going to stand behind your self-interests, okay? It's not going to be just about the team. We understand that ultimately Drinkwitz, his responsibility is to the team. But at the same time, you're basically, if you're a parent, this is the first time in your life you're letting your kids out of the house, and you're trusting somebody like Eli Drinkwitz and his coaching staff with a real responsibility there. And I think showing parents, showing potential recruits that you care more about them than just as a football transaction, well, I think there's definite value in that. Now, just to change topics just a little bit, well, there's been a lot of talk about what Desiree Reed-Francois and her departure from the University of Missouri as athletic director, leaving for Arizona, of course. A lot of talk about what her relationship with Eli Drinkwitz was like. And, well, of course, somebody asked a question. You got to ask that question. Eli Drinkwitz probably not going to give you a ton of insight here, but I'll give you his answer anyway. He said, "I think I had a great relationship with Desiree. We worked well together to advance the athletic department and Missouri football, and I think we accomplished that." So obviously he was never going to say, "I got her fired." Honestly, I don't think that's what happened. Even if it did, even if they had a terrible relationship, he's not going to go out and say something like that. And again, since everybody else has been speculating, well, allow me to speculate just a little bit here. I really don't think that Drinkwitz and Desiree Reed-Francois, their relationship, I just don't see that as the deciding factor in her leaving. Now, it is definitely interesting, as it was reported by Gabe DeArmond a couple years ago, and he's stuck by this, no reason to question it, that really the post-2022 contract extension for Drinkwitz, well, that was more of a board of curators move. In fact, it was a board of curators move, according to all the reporting, much more so than a Desiree Reed-Francois move. And in fact, she was a little bit shaky on the contract extension. But however, another contract extension, of course, after the great 2023 season, Eli Drinkwitz gets a pay bump into Lane Kiffin territory, about $9 million a year, makes him, fifth, sixth, I think, highest head coach, seventh, something like that in the SEC. The point is, I'm sure Desiree Reed-Francois was on board with that decision. How could you not be after that season? So I'm not saying that Reed-Francois and Drinkwitz were best friends. I really have no idea what their relationship is like. But again, it just doesn't seem like from the outside looking in that this was some massive power play by Eli Drinkwitz. I don't know. It just seems like there's a little bit more to it than that. And I have no idea what that is, but it just, my instincts are just telling me it's much more complicated than just, some sort of power play here by Drinkwitz. To me, I just can't see that their relationship would have gone that south in that amount of time. For what reason would be my question. I'm just not seeing one. And Missouri receiver Luther Burden, obviously one of the most important players on the Missouri offense, but I would say his secondary position, one of the absolute most important positions, on the field as well, in just about every single ball game. So let's talk about that position coming up here in just a little bit, and more notes from Eli Drinkwitz and his comments opening up the spring practice. But first, I want to tell you about FanDuel Sportsbook, because it's time to get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA action, players, and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. It's FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. By the way, speaking of Luther Burden, well, he and Brady Cook both announced that they're going to be in the new EA Sports College Football 25 video game. And quite honestly, if those two guys are in it, who have about as good a NIL opportunities as anybody in the country, two massively famous college football players, I mean, my goodness, I think everybody should take the deal then at that point. Hopefully the vast majority of guys are in the football game. But anyway, speaking of Luther Burden, as I did in the tease there, to me, punt returner, one of the low-key positions in football, one of the low-key most important spots on the field. And we just saw it in the Super Bowl, didn't we? The Kansas City Chiefs win again, 2 in a row, third Super Bowl in just a few years here for Patrick Mahomes and company. Well, maybe it doesn't happen if that ball is not muffed there. Now, here's the deal. That ball may have hit another 49er. I'm not necessarily blaming the punt returner here, but how many times do we see it? Over and over again, a big muffed punt can cost people football games. And just the guy being smart enough to know when to fair catch the ball, when to just field the ball and not cost your team 15 to 20 yards in field position when you let it bounce. And to me, that's my biggest qualm with Luther Burden as the punt returner. He's been okay as the punt returner. I can't remember any major muffed returns by Burden or anything like that, but occasionally this goes back to his high school days. If you watch his high school film, you'll see him running back as many as 5 touchdowns, it seems like, on punt returns in one season, but you'll notice almost all of them hit the ground. He likes to pick up the one hopper and, sprint one way and put his foot in the ground and get upfield and go. But that whole habit of letting the ball hit the ground, I think, has snuck in a little bit to his time at Missouri. And there's been some moments where I thought that probably cost Missouri 15 or 20 yards in field position. And those can be really big yards. It's not just the muffed opportunities and all that good stuff. It's the actual knowing when to catch the ball and just having the confidence in somebody back there to do it. So to me, obviously, quarterback's the most important position on the field. There's several other positions I'd put ahead of punt returner, but it certainly isn't the least important position on the field, I can tell you that, because right now, I think the least important position on the field that used to be a real factor in the game is the kickoff returner. Desmond Howard, back in the day for Michigan, won a Heisman Trophy in part because he was a really good kickoff returner. Well, these days, because of the new kickoff rules and because of how adept kickers are at booting the ball off that tee through the back of the end zone, your kick returner could quite literally be handled by just about anybody on your football team who can run, say, a 4.6 40-yard dash, because quite honestly, most of the time, you don't even have to catch the ball these days. You just wave your arms and go, okay, it hit it at the end zone. We're good here. And here's what's interesting. Another thing, again, to my point here, Speedy Johnson averaged 20 yards a return on kickoffs on just 7 returns, by the way. There are only 2 guys who handled kickoff returns who actually returned the ball. 7 for Speedy Johnson, a 20-yard average, and Marvin Burks about 18 yards on just 4 returns. So 11 kickoff returns in 13 games. That's less than 1 per game. I don't know. We got to do something about kickoffs, because that's you've taken one of the most exciting plays in football, and now it's just completely inconsequential and boring. I'd almost rather you just hand me the ball at the 25 at this point. But my thing is, there's got to be, if you want to do a safer form of the kickoff return, I'm okay with that. Does it need to be a punt? Something like that. I just like to see actual field position earned, but that's just me. Now, as for another specialist, of course, with Harrison Mevis moving on from college football, it's been long assumed that Blake Craig would get the first shot at that place-kicking position, and Eli Drinkwitz confirmed that Craig will definitely get the first shot. Has he won the job? No, but he's definitely the leader in the clubhouse, to use a bit of a golf analogy there. But I will say I thought this was interesting too. Former Oklahoma left guard Cayden Green, not a surprise here, but Drinkwitz said he's going to start the spring at left tackle where he played in high school. But as I pointed out, hey, there's some flexibility there. Green can definitely move over to guard if necessary, if perhaps that's the best way the best 5 linemen work out for Missouri. Drinkwitz said it's always fun to see all the talk about Cayden Green on Twitter, which I found pretty amusing. There has been a lot of hilarious talk about Cayden Green online. For whatever reason, Oklahoma fans seem to think that the only reason that Cayden Green would possibly come here is because Missouri paid him 4 times, or I've literally seen people say this, 4 times as much as what he got at Oklahoma, which is a weird excuse because I don't know, aren't you guys the ones that are supposed to have the money? You're the big bad athletic program. I get Oklahoma fans pointing out how many all-time wins for Oklahoma against Missouri. Hey, fine and dandy, guys. I'm just saying, maybe don't brag so much about being poor. That's kind of a weird one. Not something I would recommend in the dating world, by the way, but that's just me. Now, some other Missouri news and notes here from football. Isaac Thompson, a promising young defensive back safety, is going to miss spring football due to injury. Seems like Thompson's career so far has been pretty derailed by the injury bug. Hopefully, come this fall, he'll be a little more healthy and can maybe start to see some of his potential realized. Speaking of young guys with some potential, Jamarian Wayne came to Missouri as an athlete. Originally was a receiver with the Tigers. Transferred to the defensive side of the ball, now playing some cornerback this spring. So that's going to be interesting to see what happens with Jamarian Wayne. And on that defensive side of the ball, Drinkwitz confirms Mizzou's definitely going to be a 4-2-5 base defense, very similar to what you've seen from the last couple years at Missouri, just in terms of, hey, 4 down linemen, 2 linebackers, 5 defensive backs, nothing big there. But it does seem like this was kind of the interesting part. When Missouri originally, when Missouri transitioned, hey, there we go. There's the word I was searching for in vain. But when Missouri originally transitioned from Steve Wilkes to Blake Baker, well, one thing Baker did wisely in a lot of people's opinions, sure, he changed some stuff up. He has a much more aggressive philosophy than a lot of defensive coordinators for sure, but he kept a lot of the same terminology that the players were used to. So in other words, he adjusted to them instead of making all, 11 guys on the first team plus the second and third stringers too, all adjust to him. Frankly, that makes a lot more logical sense. So in other words, Corey Batoon going to take the similar philosophy that Blake Baker did in his transition. Well, I think it's smart for Batoon to do the same thing, ease his transition, really ease the players' transition to. Obviously, Batoon's going to do some stuff a little bit differently than Blake Baker did. You can't possibly expect it to be a carbon copy, but at the same time, this just seems like a very logical move to make by the defensive coordinator, the new Missouri defensive coordinator. And you know what? The other day when I was trying to solidify my theory about defense being more important in basketball and actually offense being more important in football, especially we're talking college sports here. Well, in order to solidify that, I was going through some Missouri history, and I got to tell you, I've had my criticisms of Dennis Gates and his defense in this year in particular, but I was kind of shocked by just how mediocre Missouri is defensively on the basketball court historically, especially over the last 25 seasons here of the post Norm Stewart era. So, you know what? Let's talk more about this theory I have and how shockingly mediocre the Tigers are defensively on the basketball court. But you know what? Let's talk first about the Game Time app, because quite honestly, this is the easiest way to get last-minute tickets to anything you're looking for, including the Missouri-Ole Miss basketball game on Saturday. And yeah, I know, it's Missouri basketball, but darn it, this is probably the Tigers' last best chance at a victory. And because you're a listener of this program, I can practically get you into the stadium for free. The cheapest all-in ticket right now is $14. Well, guess what? Since Game Time is the best place and the most trustworthy place to get last-minute ticket deals, all you have to do is use the promo code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Again, that's easily going to cover one ticket to get into the building. Maybe by the time, if you're really a procrastinator, maybe that code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase might even get you a couple tickets to the Mizzou Ole Miss game. Terms do apply. Just download the Game Time app, and again, use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. I think I'll get into the football part of this conversation another day. Let's just stick to the basketball part. I have a theory that served me rather well in my March Madness predictions over the last few years, and that's that if you were going to pick somebody to advance far in the big dance, they need to be able to play some defense because, well, defense travels, as the old cliche goes. You can survive an off night offensively if you can still guard. But to me, a team like Alabama, I'll just tell you, no matter what their draw is, it seems unlikely that I'm going to be taking Bama to go a long ways, despite their number one offense in the country. Well, they're 98th in terms of adjusted defense efficiency over at Ken Pom. That's just not cutting it for this here podcaster, and I got a feeling that you're not going to see Alabama going to the Final Four this year. We'll see if I end up right there. Obviously, there are going to be exceptions to all types of rules, but to my point, well, the best of the last 25 seasons here, and we're 25 seasons now if you include this season of the post-Norm Stewart era. Also happens to be, 25 seasons of the 2000s as well. And the best offensive team of the last quarter century is, of course, Frank Haith's 2012 squad. Like Alabama, they were the number one team in the country offensively, but they were about 100th or so defensively, and obviously they got knocked out by a red-hot Norfolk State team in round one. Well, the second best offense ever, none other than Dennis Gates' team last season, the ninth best team in the country. Then you've got a 2002 Quinn Snyder squad that ultimately made a run in the Elite Eight. They were the 12th best offense in the country. And you're also talking 13th, 15th, 27, 27. That's your top 7 of the last 25 years. Now, again, those last two there, those are 27. That's 03 and 04 Quinn Snyder era. The reason I want to focus on that is because those are quite a few elite offenses there for the Missouri Tigers. But when it comes to defense, boy, the picture is just not nearly as pretty. Not only do you not have nearly as many elite offenses, Missouri with 5 top 15 offenses in the last 25 years. Well, Missouri doesn't have a single top 15 defense, in the last 25 years. The best defenses of that period, the 2009 and 2010 Missouri squads coached by Mike Anderson. Of course, that 09 squad ends up in the Elite Eight. But then the third best Missouri defense, the 03 Missouri Tigers, Quinn Snyder and company, 34th. Well, that's not exactly much to write home about. And again, some of these top defenses here, the top 7 of the last 25 years, you're talking 3 Conzo Martin teams that are pretty mediocre, 43rd, 51, and 57th. And even, yes, the 2019 Frank Haith squad makes it 7th at 63rd. So your 7th best defense of the last 25 years was Frank Haith's team that was 63rd. That's a pretty good thing of context there, because if you're going to quibble with mediocre, you might be saying, well, there's 350 Division I teams. 63rd is better than mediocre. Well, I'm not comparing Missouri to Lindenwood and Southeast Missouri State. Now, I'm going to compare them to the high major teams in college basketball. Well, how many high major teams are there? Well, in my opinion, this is a little bit of loose math here. You take the Power 5 football the major five, including the Pac-12 at this point, take those five conferences, add the Big East, and then add Gonzaga. And now you're at 81 teams. Maybe throw St. Mary's in there if you want to make it a nice 82, the same number of games in an NBA regular season. But if it's 81, 82 teams, 63rd, that's decidedly below average. And in fact, the majority of those elite seasons, quote unquote, the top 7, the above average by Missouri's own standards, well, those are below average by high major standards. It turns out Missouri, as a program, the last quarter century has been pretty terrible defensively, certainly mediocre at best. So I don't really know what to make of that. It surprised me just how bad Missouri was defensively. And to my point, well, Missouri has famously never made a Final Four. You know, this actually checks out. That checks out in my theory. If Missouri's not going to be able to play good enough defense, maybe that's why they've never been there. Just a theory, again, but I think there's a lot of strong evidence pointing toward my way. And regardless, it is shocking just how mediocre Missouri basketball has been defensively over the last 25 years. And that'll do it for this edition of Locked On Mizzou. Thanks for making this show your first listen every day. And thanks for telling another true son or daughter about this podcast. We are, of course, free wherever you get audio podcasts and on YouTube as well. So until next time, I'm John Miller, and this has been Locked On Mizzou.